Peace and blessings, dear FBA family and friends. And I see some enemies. I am your brother and host, Dr. Muhammad, and these are the Dr. Muhammad Files. Welcome to another scholarly episode of the Dr. Muhammad Files, where we break down issues in a scholarly and civil manner. This episode continues a powerful and scholarly 7-part series where we examine how blacks built America, labor, culture, freedom, and democracy, a critical commentary grounded in the work of renowned scholar Dr. Joe Feagin. In this series, we spotlight the enduring and transformative contributions of foundational black Americans, those whose labor, intellect, culture, and resistance are interwoven into every corner of this nation's development. Through Dr. Feagin's analytical lens, we will challenge dominant myths, disrupt historical distortions, and reframe the narrative to reflect the truth that the building of America is inseparable from the struggle, brilliance, and resilience of black people, specifically those of foundational black American lineage. So each episode in this series aligns with one of the book's 7 chapters. Together, we'll explore the pivotal roles black Americans have played in shaping this country, from forced labor and resistance to cultural innovation and the ongoing pursuit of justice and democracy. These are the stories often ignored in mainstream discourse, but essential to any honest telling of American history. So join me as we reclaim the narrative, uplift the legacy, and speak truth to power. So let's get started.
Brothers and sisters and friends, and I see some enemies. In fact, I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we had an audience this large and didn't realize that there were some enemies present. In fact, I'm a black nationalist freedom fighter. The political philosophy of black nationalism only means that the black man should control the politics and the politicians in his own community. The time when white people can come in our community and get us to vote for them so that they can be our political leaders and tell us what to do and what not to do is long gone. By the same token, the time when that same white man, knowing that your eyes are too far open, can send another Negro into the community, get you and me to support him so he can use him to lead us astray, those days are long gone.
All right. Another shout out to my son for that fire collab on the music intro. So, before we begin, I emphasize and will use the term foundational black American to accurately reflect our identity, except when using direct quotes. So, in chapter 2, that's entitled Black Labor Building the Economy, Dr. Feagin lays bare a truth that is too often erased in the discourse of American history. That is, that black labor was not just important, it was foundational. This is why we being black American descendants of freedmen, have decided to self identify as foundational black Americans, because we understand that the black labor was not just important, but foundational to the development of this country. From the early days of forced agricultural labor to the construction of America's institutions and its infrastructure as a whole, black workers have been at the heart of it all. Yet, mainstream narratives often, I would say always or mostly ignore or whitewash these contributions. So, as we dive into this chapter, we'll uncover just how deep our FBA impact runs and how vital it is to reclaim this history honestly and fully. So, when we talk about black labor fueled nearly 4 centuries of United States development from agriculture to infrastructure, meaning without free black labor and its intellect, the United States as we now know it would not be what it is. As Dr. Feagin points out, black labor was not a side note. It was the central engine of Americans' economic development for centuries. Foundational black Americans, especially during enslavement, were the essential labor who built much of this country's wealth. Dr. Feagin averred, important to this country's economic system since the late 17th century, African Americans, he uses the misnomer, have likely been more at the essential labor core of this white dominated society for a longer period of time than any other racially oppressed group. Indeed, he goes on, Americans of European descent made extensive use of brutally enslaved black labor for much of this country's history. Frederick Douglass's haunting words makes it clear there was no season, Frederick Douglass says, no weather, no wet rest. Black people worked through brutality, building the foundation of America. Yet these truths remain buried, FBA family, friends, and I'm talking to you enemies, in many mainstream historical narratives. But today, we uncover them. So while many mainstream narratives they limit black labor to just the fields. Oh, you hear this narrative all the time, especially in the discourse on social media. Blacks just worked the field. They didn't build anything. They were just the labor, right? Well, Dr. Feagin makes it clear. Foundational black Americans were not just agricultural workers. They were the very backbone of America's development across industries. I would implore every industry beyond the plantations. Enslaved blacks and their descendants built the infrastructure, educational institutions, government buildings, transportation systems that formed the framework of the United States itself. I was in the discourse with a young lady on X just recently, and she said that the Bahamians built Miami, and that's just not true. In fact, there was a slave owner that brought slaves specifically to the what we know as the Miami area, and they built the railroads, the houses, and the infrastructure in that area before anybody was there. So that's a narrative that is oftentimes um, exaggerated or promoted, right? So yet, as Feagin reminds us, these contributions are largely erased from the dominant historical record. But the impact of labor went even further, Dr. Feagin says. Beyond their work in agriculture Enslaved workers did much of the work over 2 centuries that built up the country's educational, government, and transportation infrastructure. Although most of this work is ignored in mainstream history books and mainstream media. So, for example, enslaved foundational black Americans' back-breaking work made it possible for many white Americans to pursue careers as doctors, scientists, and scholars. So while we were doing the actual building of the infrastructure, they didn't need to do it. So they went to become doctors, lawyers. So in essence, professions often were funded directly or indirectly by the profits of slavery, land speculation, and related industries. Yet, this part of history, American history, I would implore, remains largely erased from mainstream accounts. They only relegate us to the cotton or tobacco fields. Dr. Feagin, he reminds us that black labor wasn't just exploited, it became a strategic force for liberation. When black labor was withdrawn, for example, from the Civil War, or during the Civil War, I should say, the South's economy, it just crumbled. It wasn't just passive resistance, right? Oftentimes in American history, it's told as if black Americans were docile Negroes. Well, over 200,000 formerly enslaved black men and women actively fought against the Confederacy to end slavery. Yet, much of this resistance is either erased or minimized in mainstream accounts, depriving foundational black Americans of the full truth about black power and perseverance. Dr. Feagin exposes the hard numbers behind the exploitation. Slave owners spent shockingly little to sustain enslaved black workers, but gained billions in profit. They would do the bare minimum to keep slaves alive. Or I should say, to keep them clothed, to give them housing. They made sure they were alive because they were the economic engine behind everything. But this stolen labor created intergenerational wealth for white families, a wealth gap that persists today. If we calculated the value of that theft plus lost generational interest, Dr. Feagin points out, the total reaches between 4.9 trillion and 11 trillion. That's why during the conversation of reparations, people always ask, well, what's the number? What's the reparations number, right? Well, we need to start off in the trillions. That number alone, that the profit from slavery, it strengthens the undeniable case for reparations owed to descendants of the enslaved, to foundational black Americans. Now, you have people saying, oh, well, we need to focus on other things other than reparations. Well, we are. We can fight two battles at once. That doesn't mean that Dr. Muhammad stopped pursuing his doctoral degree because of reparations, that he doesn't pursue other um, uh, initiatives and programs and his nonprofit. That doesn't mean that others alike do not pursue things. Uh, that just means we want a debt that's owed to us, and we're coming for it while we're still trying to uplift and build the foundational black American communities. This is not waiting for a handout, FBA family, friends, and enemies. This is a debt due. As Dr. Feagin points out, there were trillions of dollars profited from free black labor. We are owed Generational wealth has been passed down from white families from generation to generation. We were not able to do that. This is one of the reasons for the wealth gap today. We're coming to get our check, as Dr. Martin Luther King said. So, as we discussed earlier, and in episode one of this 7-part series, the Civil War era, it unleashed some of the largest black rebellions against the slavery system. We weren't just docile Negroes. It was a direct challenge that helped shatter the Confederacy. But the significance of black resistance and labor, it goes even deeper, FBA family friends and you enemies, as Dr. Feagin emphasizes. Without the generations of foundational labor by black Americans, from agriculture to infrastructure to wartime resistance, the United States as we know it might not even exist. This is the foundational truth that has been buried for far too long. Dr. Feagin also asserted, without both the national and international trade in enslaved African American workers and in the massive number of products they produced on slave farms and plantations and in other enterprises, various regions in the North American colonies and later the United States would almost certainly not have had the dramatic economic development experienced during the 18th and 19th centuries. Dr. Feagin also noted slavery was central to the economic prosperity and wealth, not only of Britain and its North American colonies, but of countries such as Spain, France, and Brazil, and especially to elite whites and enterprises invested in slavery. In short, FBA family, friends, and you enemies always lurking, the labor, the resistance, and sacrifices of foundational black Americans were not just critical to the rise of the United States, they were the very foundation upon which the nation's economy, infrastructure, and global influence was built. It was the stolen labor of our ancestors that fueled the entire transatlantic economic empire, enriching white Americans and white elites, not only in the United States, but worldwide. This foundational truth has been buried far too long, family, and it is our responsibility to center it, to reclaim it, and tell the story fully and unapologetically. So, FBA family, friends, and enemies, as we close out this first episode, the second episode, I should say, remember the dominant narratives was never meant to include us, foundational black Americans, descendants of freedmen. Not truthfully, not wholly, but through this series, we are reclaiming the frame. We are centering it on foundational black American voices, the resistance, and the brilliance of foundational black Americans. So, the fight for foundational black American recognition is far from over, but through education, activism, and self determination, we will reclaim our rightful place in history. Our ancestors built this nation brick by brick, law by law, institution by institution. And now it is our duty to secure the justice, wealth, and legacy they were denied. The future of foundational black American empowerment is in our hands, and together we will reshape it. Stay tuned as we continue to uncover the truth and chart the path forward. Please like the podcast, subscribe, share it, and comment below. Signing off, your brother and host, Dr. Muhammad. And these are the Dr. Muhammad Files.